So welcome everybody to our fourth of 5 sessions in our program called Limnot, Yameinu, Kein, Hoda, Graceful Aging. This program takes into account specific mental health issues and concerns related to today's seniors and all of us that love them, and gives a variety of helpful ways for us to frame our situation at this life juncture. This series of programs was made possible in part by a grant from our own Pacific Southwest region of the United Synagogue of Conservative Judaism and the Joseph P. Reardon Foundation. There's been no charge for any of these programs. Ground rules, some just things. If you have questions, put them in the chat. We will be looking at them throughout the presentation. And please put them in the general chat, not to the rabbis individually, because they're going to be concentrating on the presentation. And please keep yourself on mute as much as possible. So I want to welcome Rabbi Sachs, who will introduce our speaker for this afternoon.
Thank you, Fran. So great that we're all together, and it is really a privilege and a pleasure and an honor to welcome my colleague and teacher, Rabbi Dayle Friedman. She is a board-certified chaplain who's known as a pioneer in the development of a Jewish spiritual vision for aging, spiritual care, and healing. She was the founding director of Hidur, the Center for Aging and Judaism at the Reconstructionist Rabbinical College, which provided education and spiritual resources and scholarship for elders and their caregivers. She offers spiritual direction, classes, training, and consulting through Growing Older. Growing Older is her Philadelphia-based national practice. She was ordained by Hebrew Union College Jewish Institute of Religion in 1985. From 85 until 97, she was the founding director of chaplaincy services at the Philadelphia Geriatric Center. Rabbi Friedman has written a number of books, and they include Jewish Wisdom for Growing Older, Finding Your Grit and Grace Beyond Midlife, Jewish Visions for Aging, a professional guide for fostering wholeness, that was written and with Rabbi Eugene Borowitz and Thomas Cole. She edited and wrote for Jewish Pastoral Care, the practical handbook from traditional and contemporary sources. She was listed among the Forward's 50 most influential American Jews in 2008, and she was listed among the 50 most influential American women rabbis in 2010. Rabbi Friedman has received not one, but 2 honorary Doctor of Divinity degrees, one from the Hebrew Union College Jewish Institute of Religion, and one from the Reconstructionist Rabbinical College. In 2011, she received the Religion, Spirituality, and Aging Award from the American Society on Aging. So she is the really the obvious choice, but beyond those things, I actually happen to know Rabbi Friedman to a certain degree. She and I worked on a project together not that long ago called Psalms in the Key of Healing, which was a book that's tried to finish the work of our dear colleague, Rabbi Harris Raphael Goldstein. And the chapter that Rabbi Friedman contributed is on Psalm 92, and which is the Psalm for Shabbat. And she looks at that Psalm through the prism of growing older. So it's a beautifully done chapter, and I have read it any number of times. And those of you that may have that book, because we have talked about it at our synagogue. You should look for that chapter and reread it later on. But without any further ado, I want to present our teacher for today and my dear colleague, Rabbi Dayle Friedman.
Thank you so much, Rabbi Sachs. I'm really, really honored to be with you all from Congregation Am Hayam, whose name I love. And I am coming to you today with a conversation that you might have thought twice before logging on. You might have thought, like, why do I want to be part of this conversation? I'll tell you why I want to be part of this conversation. There was a fantastic woman named Maggie Kuhn. You might have heard of her. She founded an organization in the 70s called the Gray Panthers. And the Gray Panthers was an activist group made up of youth and elders working together to change the world and bring equality and justice. And she was fabulous and really wild. And I used to bring my students from the Reconstructionist Rabbinical College who were working to learn about aging to meet this person who was an exemplar of daring aging. So Maggie Kuhn told us one time that when she turned 80, she'd made a decision. She decided, I'm going to do one outrageous thing a day for the rest of my life. Well, I have not reached 80, but I have passed 60, and maybe I don't do it every day, but I think about Maggie Kuhn of blessed memory, and I try to do outrageous things sometimes. So today's outrageous thing is inviting us all together to contemplate the scary prospect of living with dementia. So I'm going to share my PowerPoint, and I'm going to ask you a question. Oops, I forgot to share. Sorry, let's try that again. It's going to look prettier in 1 minute. Okay. So I am asking you to complete these 2 sentences. When I get dementia, I fear, you fill in the blank. And when I get dementia, I hope. If you happen to have a pen, write it down.
Are we allowed to put it? Would you like us to put answers into the chat if we?
Oh yeah, even better. Put it in the chat, and then it'll be accessible to all of us because I want to share what we come up with.
Right. So if you're comfortable writing into the chat, please do. If you are not, but still you might want to just jot down your initial thoughts to the prompts on your own so that you have them for as Rabbi Friedman continues.
We're a small enough group that if you want to just raise your hand, I fear declining with age. Thank you, Marcia and Mark. When I have dementia, I fear being alone. Yeah. When I have dementia, I fear Alma. Oh, you have
Alma,
to
you're
unmute.
muted.
I
Good.
fear short-term memory loss.
You fear tortured memory loss?
Oh, short-term.
Short-term memory loss, yes. Yes, and Brenda said something similar. She said, I fear not remembering those I love. And Rabbi Sachs said, when I get dementia, I fear the reactions of my loved ones and what this might put them through. Any other fears that y'all want to share? And how about hopes? Rabbi Sachs said, if I get dementia, disobeying my prompt, by the way, I hope that I will be treated with dignity. Other hopes? Not recognizing my family. Yes, Marcia and Mark. Alma.
I hope my family is kind and respectful to me as they were before.
Beautiful. So you hope to have a continuity of the kind of relationships that you've had of
Mhm.
kindness and respect. Beautiful. Other hopes? I hope it's, may God bless and keep dementia far away from us. Mark and Marcia say, hope it is deferred a long time. Any other hopes? Sometimes it's interesting that the hopes are kind of the obverse of the fears. So there are, in our society, with the kinds of attitudes that we have about dementia, there are a lot of fears. And I've just shared some that come from my colleague Ann Basting, who's a fantastic expert on dementia, who brings the arts and theater into relationship with people who have memory loss. So she says fear of being a burden, fear of the unknown, fear of losing control, fear of being violated, and fear of a meaningless existence. Those are surely fears that are deserving of being taken seriously. Why do I ask us to take this imaginative leap? Why did I say when I get dementia? Because one way or another, we're all likely to contend with dementia. If we live long enough, the chances are it will be in ourselves, but if not, it will certainly be in our dear ones. And it's not something that we can just wish away. So I have up here the phrase, the tragedy narrative. Part of what scares us about about having dementia is that the narrative that we carry around in our society about what it means to have dementia. It comes from fear, this narrative, and it prompts fear. And it depersonalizes people with dementia in the meantime. We are taught that people with dementia are as if they're empty vessels with no agency or no story or no volition or no capacity for enjoyment and love and connection and meaning. And I find that when we talk about dementia, we're talking in a way that completely excludes what I've seen from working my whole career with hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of people who are living with dementia, who did experience love and joy and connection and meaning and delight. And I really find that our cultural apprehension depersonalizes and dehumanizes people. And the response to that is, of course, fear and loathing. Well, why shouldn't I just live in dread? It turns out, this is my considered opinion based on nearly 40 years of accompanying people with dementia and their families, but also just living life a long time. It turns out that what we resist, they say, persists. That fear and loathing and denial actually cause more suffering. There's a Buddhist concept called the second arrow. And in the first arrow in the Buddhist concept is you get hit with an arrow and you're physically injured. The second arrow is you say, what did I do to deserve this? Or I hate the person who did this to me. Or how come God's forgotten me? And those things are creating more and more suffering. So when we avoid and evade and deny and push away dementia, we are causing suffering for people who have dementia, because how can you relate to somebody with dementia if you're not willing to consider that this is part of the human experience that could happen to you? But also, we're hurting ourselves and we're hurting people who might turn out to be caregivers for us. For example, if I don't ever talk about or think about or admit that I could have dementia, how am I going to tell the people who are likely to take care of me what I would want? how am I going to help them to not be tortured by guilt if they make a choice that they think maybe I wouldn't have wanted? How am I going to help them to have less burden by knowing what my wishes are? Those things are only possible if I admit to the possibility. So I want to suggest that the reality of dementia is far more complex than that tragedy narrative would let you know. And I want to share a little bit about what I've learned, both from my professional accompanying of people with dementia as a rabbi and chaplain, but also because I have accompanied my dad and now my mom in that terrain. So I'm living it very much day to day. So one way of thinking about dementia, by the way, I use the word dementia, and sometimes people say, well, what's the difference between dementia and Alzheimer's? This is a little aside, a technical aside. Alzheimer's disease is one type of dementia, of which there are a few different kinds. You might have heard of Parkinson's dementia. You might have heard of Lewy body dementia or frontotemporal dementia. Those are much, much more rare types. The predominant type of dementia is Alzheimer's disease. The other type that's most common is called vascular dementia. They used to call it, oh, now I don't remember, but it was something to do with hardening of the arteries. Anyway, and they manifest a little bit differently, but I use the term dementia as opposed to using a term that's more specific. So how is dementia like wandering in the wilderness? Well, when you wander in the wilderness as our ancestors did for 40 years, it's confusing. There are no guideposts, and it's often lonely. When you can't remember the past and you don't have anybody who's willing to talk to you about the future, which might be death, you have access only to the present, to this moment. And if this moment is great, that might be wonderful. But if this moment is sad or uncomfortable or confusing, that might be very difficult. But in the wilderness, our people found oases. And amid dementia, if you're lucky, you can find oases of connection. This is my friend Irene's father, who could not speak at this point in his life in his 90s, but he lived in a home where there were these lovebirds. And his greatest delight was to sit and watch the lovebirds all day long. And when my friend Irene came to visit her dad, she would sit right next to him. And she said, we don't need any words. We don't need any conversation. We're just present in the moment and in the wonder of and the beauty of those birds. And this is my mom. These are my daughter's two dogs. And my mom is 92, almost 93. She moved recently across the country from Denver to a memory care in Philadelphia so she could be near me and my family. And she is having a great time, as you can see there. She loves the dogs. My kids all have dogs. So when they come to visit, they bring their dogs. And when she comes to our house for Shabbat, she gets to be with the dog. Sometimes if you're in the wilderness, you're at the mercy of a hostile environment. That certainly was the case for our ancestors when they were attacked, and the most vulnerable of them attacked in the wilderness, and when they had to experience moments of lack and of suffering. So some of the hostile environmental aspects that face people with dementia in our culture are dehumanization. And a man named Tom Kitwood was a brilliant psychologist who really wanted to rethink dementia. And he suggested 14 different kinds of dehumanization. I've chosen 4 here. Deception. Yesterday, my mother lost her machateinista, her son-in-law's mother. They had been in each other's lives for 40 years. And the director of her memory care wrote me a note and she said, your mom's been very sad today. Maybe in the future, you don't tell her if somebody dies. Is that a dignified and respectful way to treat someone? I got on my high horse, I'm a little embarrassed to say, and I said, well, I think about this differently. I said, I think that sadness and grief are part of life, and my mom is very much living. So we'll be writing sympathy cards to her son-in-law and grandson tomorrow when we see each other, and going to Shabbat services and saying Kaddish. And we will be sad together. And if you want to be with her, you can ask her about her son-in-law's mother who was dear to her. Ask her about Thelma. But that is a form of dehumanization to say, oh, we should just pretend like nobody ever dies. And by the way, I'm now going to add on to this and embroider. If you have activities in a place where people with dementia live and they're all happy, 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 you know, we have what they call the BBC of institutional life, bingo, birthday, and crafts. And you don't ever talk about sorrow or what's going on in the world or loss, that is deceptive. That's not reality. You've just taken a person and removed them from the fullness of life. So that's the first one. The second one is disempowerment, which of course, all of us know who've ever seen anybody living in a situation where they're a recipient of care. Even, excuse me one second. Even if they're at home and they're the recipient of care, maybe they don't have a lot of choices about what they're able to do, whom they're able to see. Sometimes when you're able to eat, you're disempowered. And that is dehumanizing. And then the third one is infantilization. It absolutely blows my mind that somebody who's been a person of dignity and respect all of a sudden is sweetie and honey and is treated like what the late Maggie Kuhn called wrinkled babies, you know, infantilized. And, you know, there's a certain voice even that people speak to a person who's confused, you know, oh, now we're going to go to eat. Are you excited about going to eat? That nobody better talk to me that way. That's all I can say. It's awful to be infantilized. And finally, objectification. When I worked in the nursing home, I saw this all the time, where people would talk about a person that they were caring for, not by their name even, but by their room number. And an anthropologist who studied nursing home life talked about bed and body work, how sometimes staff are just, they're focused on their physical tasks that they need to do to somebody and not focused on relationship and on caring. So those are all dehumanizing experiences that a person with dementia can face. I want to prepare for dementia so that I can help myself to have ease, should that be my fate. And I want to prepare for dementia to help those who will care for me to have ease. So that's why we're here. That's why I'm inviting you into this challenging conversation, because I think there's something truly to be gained. So I've been thinking for the last few years about how can we understand, how can we prepare ourselves to be able to face dementia with grace? I know that part of the title for this series had to do with aging gracefully. How could I come to be graceful in facing dementia? After all, I've seen literally hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of people. I've seen all kinds of reactions and always wondered, which one will I be? And really worried about that. So I want to share with you a teaching from Jewish tradition, from the Baal Shem Tov, the founder of Hasidism, who lived in 18th century Poland. Now, he developed an approach to dealing with unwelcome experiences. The original context for this was, oh my gosh, I'm praying in shul and I start thinking about my laundry, or I start thinking about business, or I start thinking about more off the path kinds of things. Those are, he called those machshavot zarot, strange thoughts. And he said, we need to have a way to deal with them. But then he said later, actually, this approach would apply to any experience of brokenness. So I'm going to teach you this three-faceted approach of the Baal Shem Tov and suggest that maybe we can use it to grow ourselves into being ready to face any unwelcome experience, and also the experience of dementia, should that come our way. So the first of there are three parts to this teaching, and I'll teach them sequentially, but I imagine, like anything that's staged, they could overlap. So the first thing that he suggests we do when we face an unwelcome experience is stop fighting. And he calls this hachna'ah. Hachna'ah in Hebrew means submitting or surrendering. So I call this yielding or softening to reality. The second thing is havdalah, making a distinction, discerning what is actually there, being curious. We'll hear more about this. And the third one is hamtakah, sweetening or transformation. So let's look at them one at a time. Hachna'ah, yielding or softening to reality. I experienced the need to do this very intensely, as I bet you did, exactly 4 years ago today when the pandemic hit. And with every day and every week and then every month, there was something that I'd been looking forward to that I had to face wasn't going to happen. Whether it was having services in person with my congregation on Purim, or going to a cousin's wedding, or speaking at a conference, or seeing my family. Each one of these that came up, I kind of did what I call the toddler stance. No, 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 no. Of course we're going to have Purim. Of course we're going to go to the wedding. Of course we're going to have this simcha. But with each one, I couldn't fight my way through it. I had to learn to let go. And that does not come easily to me. So another way of putting this is what the psychologist and teacher of Buddhism, Tara Brach, calls radical acceptance. Accepting what is, even if it's not what we wanted. And when I say softening to reality, because I find that there's literally this experience of kind of becoming rigid in wanting to fight off something that is. And Byron Katie, who is a person that you can find a lot on TED Talks and whatever, says she has a kind of approach to self-help she calls the work. But anyway, she has this expression that I really love. She says, whenever I fight reality, I lose, but only 100% of the time. So the first step to facing the unwelcome experience is stopping the fighting of reality and softening to, but it is in Hebrew, we say Zeh ma sheyesh, this is what we have. And only with Zeh ma sheyesh can we say, and with this, we're going to continue and find our way. But we can't really get past the wall of resistance unless we allow ourselves to soften. We have to surrender our expectations about how it was supposed to be. Second part, Havdalah. We all know the word Havdalah because it's a ritual that we perform at the end of Shabbat to make a distinction between Shabbat and the days of the week. Here, I'm talking about making a distinction to be able to understand better what is this reality we're in. Because only if we open up to seeing more clearly and thoroughly can we understand where we are and how we may react. I like to think about discernment and also curiosity. Curiosity is one of, I think, the greatest spiritual gifts. If I enter a dark room, I could just say, oh my God, it's dark. I can't find my way. Or I could stop. And I'm sure you've had this experience, and let my eyes get used to the dark. And all of a sudden, it's not unrelieved blackness, as my late stepfather used to call my mother's favorite chocolate cake. It's not unrelieved blackness. There are shapes. There are degrees of darkness. Maybe there are even sources of light. Maybe light is coming in under the door. Maybe there are little lighter parts of this reality. And if I try to make out where I am, much more becomes visible. Maybe even sparks of light hidden in husks, as Hasidism and Kabbalah talks about reality. Now, if I do that, if I engage in Havdalah, I may be able to ask some other questions like, oh, what's still whole in this place of brokenness? Maybe I'm dealing with physical disability. Maybe I'm dealing with having some memory loss. Am I now all broken? Or is there still something that's whole? In my dear one, who doesn't remember what I told her yesterday, is there a way that she's present and with me now? Maybe that's where wholeness lies. So I think this is part of Havdalah. And we are all beings made in the divine image. So I maintain that even in that place of darkness, there are sparks of the divine in us. So there has to be a source of light. Now, if we get curious about where we are when we face an unwelcome experience, then we can figure out, okay, where can I find a way to act? How can I hold this reality? What are my possibilities within it? That's only possible if we exercise our curiosity and discernment. Finally, the third part of the which is amtaka, which means sweetening, or maybe transformation. So I'll give you an example of how transformation might be experienced. My late father was not an easy guy. He was very accomplished and, did many useful things, but he was also a wounded person and he could be wounding. And he lived with dementia at home for a long time. And then he took a fall and he had to go to a nursing home. And when he went to the nursing home, I had this prayer that just came to me. I didn't even know what it meant. I said, God, let something happen to his soul. Honestly, I didn't know what I meant. But if you would have asked me what kind of a person would he be in the nursing home, I would have predicted my dad would have been one of those who gave the staff hell, who complained about everything, who was obstreperous. Guess what? That wasn't the way my dad was at all. He was loving and grateful. Apparently, with the loss of his memory, a lot else left. I like to say that the ego, personality, wounded part burned off. And all that was left were soul traits that I did not honestly know were there, that gratitude and love. And I was able to have some really beautiful experiences with my dad that I would have never expected to have in this time, that other people would have said, oh, what a terrible time. I'm so sorry you experienced this, or he experienced this. Well, there was a lot of beauty there. And when he died, I felt really complete. And I know he did too with our relationship in a way that I could have never anticipated. So that's an example of hamtaka, of sweetening. I couldn't have predicted it. You don't know. Doesn't always happen, but it happens more than you would think. And I, having accompanied a lot of caregivers, I hear stories about these things and just how healing happens that they wouldn't have expected. and how delight comes when they wouldn't have expected it. So 3 things. Hachna'ah, softening or yielding to reality. Havdalah, curiosity and discerning about what's there. And hamtakah, the possibility of sweetening or transformation. So I want to suggest that these 3 dimensions that the Baal Shem Tov gave us can be something that we can work with. And I'd like to invite you to spend just a few minutes now experimenting. Is that okay? Okay, so make yourself comfortable, or I should say, allow yourself to be comfortable as best you can in front of a screen. And we're going to practice using these 3 dimensions in some place where we encounter unwanted realities. So first, take a deep breath and just allow your body to soften. Notice if there's some place that's holding that you maybe want to give some love to or soften. Take another deep breath and take some time to reflect on one realm of your life. And I'm going to give you some suggestions. You might think of others. One realm you could think about is intimate relationships to a partner or parents or children or siblings. One part is that you could think about is your work, whether that's volunteer work or vocational work. You could think about your home, your physical surroundings. You could think about your physical health, this body that carries our soul, or maybe something in your religious or spiritual life. So I want you, if you will, to ask yourself, is there something I'm avoiding acknowledging or I'm resisting in this dimension of my life, whether it's relationships or work or home or the body or spiritual life? Is there something I'm avoiding acknowledging or I'm resisting? If you become aware of something, notice the resistance. What does it feel like in your body? Is there an image or a metaphor that describes it? Allow the resistance to talk to you. What would be the worst thing that might happen if you face the truth? What would be the best? Can you invite yourself to open up a bit? Let's just take a couple of minutes of silence. Is there a hope that you have about this reality? Perhaps you'll want to express that hope as a prayer. Maybe it would sound something like this. Source of life, or whatever name for God suits you, who has sustained my ancestors and me, help me to face whatever it is that is so difficult to turn toward. Give me strength and courage, and guide me on this path whose direction I cannot yet see. Open me to the reality before me. Help me to be whole. So I would love it if you would like to say anything about how this experience was for you of just doing this practice. Anybody willing to unmute and tell us? You don't have to tell us the content, just any words about the experience.
It's
Fran?
easier, it was easier to accept it than to fight against it. You know, it takes much more energy to fight it. And when I took that deep breath, it was like, oh, okay, it's here. Make peace more with it than try and fight it.
So it sounds like there was almost a relief
Yes, yeah,
to let go of the fight.
yeah.
Thanks so much, Fran. Rabbi Sachs?
Thank you. I think that I actually felt two competing things. There was a part of me that was softening and maybe even sweetening to some pieces. And then there were still some that I was sort of still tugging a little bit. But feeling like if I start on the stuff that I'm more receptive to, I can come back and maybe find myself a little bit more receptive to things I was still tugging against. So that was sort of what I was feeling. So overall, it left me very hopeful, but I do feel like there was a little bit of tension, maybe.
Great. And of course, we've built up this dread and resistance over probably a long time. So, this was probably what, 2 minutes? Might take a little longer. It might not be all at once. And it's good to give ourselves permission to be growing and not like finished. Right? Any other comments? Anybody else want to share what the experience was like for you?
They gave really a lot to think about, and maybe I could be more willing to face what's coming in the future, and because I've faced it in the past, that it's maybe I can accept it more, and it won't be so scary.
Beautiful. It's interesting how I ran wisdom circles for older women for many, many years. And we would meet over time once a month with a group of maybe 8 or 12 people. And what we did was mostly explore the scary parts of growing older. And it's just so interesting how going into the scary part makes it sort of defangs it, it makes it less scary. And that's a little counterintuitive, I think. But that's kind of what I got from what you said, Brenda. All right, I'd love to open to any other questions or comments more generally about the presentation. And then if I can, I'm going to reserve a minute or two before we reach our time limit to just share a closing prayer blessing. So questions, comments about this notion of preparing for dementia? Rabbi Sachs?
Thank you. So I actually have two questions, if I may. For one is really about the dehumanization. You had mentioned 4 out of 14 kinds of dehumanization. I think that there's a certain difference, and I'm wondering what your thought is. That it feels like I agree. Like I don't like deception anyway. It's not a thing for me, and I don't like treating people as if they're little babies. That's just not. I don't try to do that, and I hope people don't do that. So that is something that to me is maybe a little different, because it's people who are maybe they're well intentioned, but are actually doing a dehumanizing that's unnecessary and doesn't need to be done. But it feels to me with like a disempowerment, there are certain things that maybe because of medical condition, that there are certain things that maybe we, in order to salvage as much of the quality of life as we can, we have to, take medication or do certain things that maybe we don't really want to do, but are really in the best interest of our getting the most out of who we are at the moment. And I was wondering, so to me, the dehumanizations are of 2 different types. I don't know if you feel that way.
I actually think it's really important what you asked about, but what you're pointing to is a sort of fundamental conflict of basic values. One value is the value of autonomy, which of course, you know, in America, we claim that we believe in the rights of the individual and self-determination. The other is called beneficence. It's wanting what is good for another. It's also, beneficence verges on paternalism because it presumes that I know what's best for the other. So these two things clash a lot, and they can clash for somebody who is cognitively intact but physically frail. I used to see it all the time in the nursing home when people didn't get asked about their own medical treatment. Doctors would automatically go to their kids who might have had a very different opinion about what they wanted. But it certainly happens also with someone who has some confusion or cognitive loss. So it doesn't have to be 100%, you know, it's not black or white. I once was asked to help talk to somebody who had some cognitive impairment about whether they wanted a certain procedure. They could not understand. I mean, there's actually a technical definition about what it means to be decisionally capable, which I won't go into, but they couldn't understand all of it. But they could say, are you interested in living more? You know, and what's more important to you? Is living more important, or is your physical comfort more important? So I think we can really try to give a person the dignity of having some say, not maybe all, but at least some say. And we can all make this a lot easier by expressing our wishes while we can, right?
Mhm.
And I think this might relate to what Fran just wrote in the chat, which is how do we start conversations with our loved ones? So do you mean like about our wishes? Great. So this I have this conversation all the time with people about how can I talk to my kids? They won't want to talk about this. You know, they're going to run screaming from the room. And sometimes that's true. But if you start the conversation and you say, I want to make things easier for you. I've been in the position before, and many of us have, of having to make decisions when I had no idea what the person wanted. And I felt like no matter what I did, it was the wrong thing. I want to make it easier for you. I want you to know what it is that I want. And with regard to dementia, and usually that turns out to be fine and much less charged than you might think it is. With regard to dementia, I think it's really important to talk about our wishes. So for example, I've already had some conversations with my kids about, you know, I got two parents who've had dementia. It very well could happen to me, and I want you to know. Of course, I would like to live in my own home. Of course, I'm going to want to stay in my own home. And it is very possible that there's going to come a time when what I want is not consonant with what I need. And I want you to know I give you permission to call it at that time, and don't feel guilty. Don't feel guilty. I'm asking you to make that decision and not to ruin your life over me. Lois, you have to unmute. Lower left of your screen, probably.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
I would like you to give me a brief description of how dementia affects a person. Can you?
Well, dementia can last a long time. So it might start with, you know, kind of forgetfulness around day-to-day things. I'm not talking about where do I leave my keys. I've been forgetting my keys, you know, since I was in my 30s. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about, you know, let's say putting the milk in the pantry, or you know, just sort of a disorientation around day-to-day things, making mistakes in bookkeeping and financial stuff, forgetting to pay bills. mixing up medicines. These are some examples of things that can happen. Doesn't happen all at once. It's subtle and it can be a little hard to tell. But as the condition progresses, it's very common to have lost short-term memory. So, for example, I can tell you my mom, within a single conversation, will not remember 10 minutes later what we said at the beginning. So that's a loss of short-term memory. A lot of times people still have long-term memory, but they don't have short-term memory. And as it progresses, there can be difficulty with self-care, like kind of forgetting how to get dressed or how to pay attention to physical sensations about toileting. That's usually a very big watershed, excuse the expression, is if somebody should become incontinent. And ultimately it's a physical process where the body just eventually stops even the most automatic things. But that process could take 10 years or 15 years or 5 years. Does that answer your question? Is that what you wanted to know?
God willing, in 3 weeks, I'll be 98.
Kanahara. I just today went to a funeral for my brother-in-law's mother who was 104 and a half and absolutely with it till the end. So not everybody gets dementia. Not everybody. Yes, Rabbi Sachs. Are you going to tell me we're at time?
We are, but I'm going to ask another question that has sort of two things, if I may.
Okay. Can I ask you to put in the chat the link to the handout? I
Oh,
prepared
yes.
a handout with some resources for you all, which you can click the link and then you can download it or print it or whatever you want to do.
Let me, oh, here it is, I think. Okay.
Barbara, I'm on a webinar. Can I call you back?
Well, I'm going to be on.
While he's doing that, let me just say that one of the ways that I think about preparing for dementia, I call advancing joy. And it's not about what do I want or not want about medical care, but what gives me pleasure? And I've created a document in which asks about what do you like? What gives you pleasure? What do you enjoy in terms of nature, in terms of music, in terms of food, in terms of socialization or not socialization? And you'll find that document linked on this resource list. Yes, Rabbi Sachs, back to you.
Okay. For some reason, I am not getting it, but I will send to everyone a copy of the document.
Beautiful.
So no problem. Sorry. It's not the right thing that I posted. So generally when we think of dementia, we at least often maybe think of people as they get older. My first husband, Olav Shalom, died at age 43 of AIDS-related causes. And one of the things was he had developed dementia as part of AIDS HIV. It was a 4-year journey. So he started getting when he was 39, and probably dementia started slowly setting in when he was maybe 40, which is a little bit younger than we normally may think of when we think of people starting to have the onset of symptoms that might be dementia. So I was wondering, number one, is there a difference that the literature suggests between dementia in seniors and those who get dementia at an early age? And secondly, you talked about starting conversations about our wishes. Is there a thought that you might have about starting conversations with family members or friends who maybe are evincing signs of early stage dementia, and that we might want to ask them, have they thought about their mental functioning as they age?
Okay, well, the first part, there is a phenomenon called early onset dementia, and it really is a different beast. It tends to be much faster and more dramatic, and I think it might be more familial than the kind that sets off in later life. So, and it's much less common. It's very uncommon. And very sad, and I'm sorry for your experience going through it. Marcia and Mark, one of them said, if you want to start the conversation about the other conversation, offer them dinner. Might be a good idea about what you're asking too. It's a very delicate thing. You know, there was a question in the New York Times in the ethicist column a couple of weeks ago. The person writes, I'm a neurologist and my next door neighbor just died, and I noticed that the widow is exhibiting what I'm pretty clear are signs of Parkinson's. Should I tell her? Which is kind of very, interesting on many levels. But I think it's a very delicate thing to bring to somebody if they're not really close to us, hey, I'm noticing. I mean, sometimes we have to do that, I mean, my mom will say, why didn't you tell me X? And I'll say, I might have told you, but sometimes people forget. And she goes, oh yeah, I do that. So I don't try to pretend like she doesn't have forgetfulness, which is one name for dementia that I really like. But I think, if we love somebody and we have a relationship of caring, it's possible to say, what are you noticing? And do you have any concerns? I have some concerns for you. I actually just dealt with a counseling client who's younger than I am, who it was quite clear to me was showing signs of dementia. And it was really important to me to know that other people in her life were helping her to deal with that, which I did find out was the case. So I know we've been talking about things that are really challenging, and I want to make sure that we end with words of blessing. Is that okay? So I want to go back to the slide for just a moment. Did I share? Yes. Okay. This is a prayer. It comes from that Psalm 92 that Rabbi Sachs mentioned. This is my interpretive translation, and I want to offer it to all of us as a blessing. And this includes, should we be living with dementia? I pray that this can be true for all of us. May we grow fruitful as we age, ripe and abundant and sage. Keep our hearts open to all we face, present to goodness, even a trace. Renew us, let our spirits soar, sustain us, our rock for more. Rabbi Sachs, I think you had some announcements you wanted to make.
Yeah, I'm just sort of was taken by the beauty of that prayer, and the meaningfulness for me of this time that we've had. So I just, Devarim min alev nichnasim el alev, that heartfelt words enter our hearts, and I think we've all been touched and moved, and moved both emotionally, but also thoughtfully about our own lives and the lives of our loved ones, and how we might be better and more thoughtful and caring and to each other and to ourselves. So I really, really appreciate your time. Yasher Koach and Kala Kavod Lach. It was really a tremendous, really beautiful hour. One of the most meaningful hours I've spent in ages. So thank you so much for the Torah that you bear. Thank you.
Thank you for coming with me into scary territory. I really give you a lot of credit, all of you, for hanging in. You didn't run screaming from the room. You really stayed very present. And it was
Thank you.
Privilege to be with you.
Thank you. Thank you. We will send out a copy of your form. When I put them in the chat, and it kept saying too big to put in, so I'm going to send a copy to everyone. I think we have Hopefully you're all on our, I think you're all on our email list. So we will send a copy of that out to you. And I believe, Fran, you have some announcements?
Sure. First, thank you, Rabbi. I was looking, I'm a big person of looking around the room, and am on the Zoom calls a lot with congregants and teaching and everything. And people were intent on your words in a very hard conversation. So I appreciate all that you did for us. So I'm so glad you guys joined us. Our last in this series will be a significant Jewish book club. I feel weird saying this one. Next Wednesday at 7 p.m. via Zoom. We will be discussing Rabbi Geller's book, Getting Good at Getting Older. Rabbi is my Vanna White over there, showing the book. And please come, even if the saying is you don't have to have read the book to come to the discussion. And I encourage you to, at least if you were not at our Saturday Shabbat program where you got the book as a gift, please come anyway, because this is a fabulous resource guide in it. And one of the chapters actually that I have been kind of looking at is kind of what Rabbi Friedman was talking about, of how do you have these discussions? How do you get in the right place? And so it could dovetail off of her discussion, and you'll get the Zoom link from Brenda that next week. And for any more information, you can look at our website at congregationamhayam.com. And all of our sessions, including this one, are going to be on our website under a tab on our website. This one will probably not be posted till next week, so don't look for it right away, because our webmaster is enjoying a much needed time away. So thank you all for coming. And Rabbi Friedman, the world is gifted with somebody like you helping families and individuals in this journey. It's a blessing.
Thank you so much. Privileged to be with you.
Thanks, everyone. Have a good rest of the week and a good Shabbos. We have services this weekend with Rabbi Ben Goldstein, who has been selected by the search committee to lead services. So if you're in the Ventura area, and on Sunday, our community is having a concert of music from the St. Petersburg Society of Jewish Folk Music. It should be stunning. It is very inexpensive, $18 for general admission. And if you cannot afford that, contact me privately. But it'll be at Temple Beth Torah. But it is a project of our two synagogues, plus Temple Ner Ami in Camarillo and the Jewish Federation. And it's a wonderful cultural event, and we hope that you will find your way there. So all of that is happening before next week's final program on our Graceful Aging series. Again, Yasher Koach to Rabbi Friedman, and thank you all. Have a good Shabbos. Take care.
Bye, everybody.
Thank you.